This is TWiT.
Rene Ritchie, iMore, my bad. I was wrong about the iPad Pro. You felt obligated to re-review it. Why?
So let me give some context here. When I reviewed it, I reviewed the hardware because to me, iOS 12 was a known quantity. I'd already spent 20 minutes reviewing that, or 6,000 words reviewing that, and I was up to 20 minutes and 6,000 words on this. So I didn't want to recapitulate what I felt was a known quantity. And a lot of people said yes, but Apple has escalated the hardware, so it is fair to revisit the software. And also, it seems like everybody decided to review. Like if you go down the list on YouTube names, literally every review is, can iPad Pro replace your laptop? Which to me was like, I didn't even think about it because Apple so specifically, from Steve Jobs to Tim Cook, has said it's not a laptop replacement. I didn't consider that, and a lot of people said you should have considered that. So I decided to re-review it.
I understand
from a laptop
confusion because, like with the "What's a Computer" ad, Apple has kind of implied that this is the computer of the future.
No, totally, 100%. But it's like an iMac and a MacBook Air are both computers, but an iMac is not a laptop. Like there are different tools along the same spectrum that will suit different need paths. But the minute you have
but what would people replace with an iPad except a laptop? You're not going to replace an iMac with it.
I mean, some people are going to want a very high end, like they're going to, like I have a 15-inch MacBook Pro that I use for Final Cut Pro, and I'm not going to take it with me everywhere, so I use the iPad Pro.
I know, but let's point out, with the screen and the keyboard and the pencil, this is what a laptop costs.
Sure, I think the view of some people, the alternate view is that it's an alternative to a laptop for people who don't need the specific areas in which a laptop excels. They prefer the areas in which an iPad excels. It is a legitimate alternative to it.
That's kind of what I said.
Everything that a laptop has to do in order to be legitimate.
If there's an app you use, maybe it's Lightroom, that sings, and you'd rather use the iPad for it than a laptop, then that's a good choice for you. But it isn't. I don't. I'm sure you said this. It isn't a replacement for a full laptop. Only if you do one thing or two. If the things you do make sense. I think it's more an adjunct. I think Apple's intent is completely normal, is that you buy the Apple Watch, the iPhone, the iPad, and a laptop, and maybe an iMac too, and that way you'll have everything you need.
And I use this example way too much, but there's a bunch of people for whom those traditional computers, and it's a large market, have just never been accessible to them. They've been confounding, confusing, really smart people who've been made to feel less than because they didn't understand terminals or file systems or just the paradigms that have grown up through geeky computer science hippies that Andy mentioned at the beginning, now to a massive mainstream audience and to a large segment of the market. And I think that's where you see the sales numbers for iPad. This is a computing device that does not have to be a traditional computer or a laptop, and they prefer it that way.
Again, we've talked about this a couple times, but where you really see that is the under 10 and over 60 range. When you're in an airport, those are all iPads, or all tablets, and there's a bunch of us in the middle of that, that are using computers, but it's like it is a replacement for a large portion. That
was Steven Sinofsky's contention, is that we only think it's not a full computer because we have preconceived notions.
Well, and we're the generation that has spent a lot of time on a computer. I have been, so we, that 10 to. Or maybe even, I would say 15
maybe
to
we're the
60.
last generation that wants a command line, or the last generation that wants to use a mouse to edit text. Or
remember
maybe we're the last generation that wants to actually write computer code. But we still want to do those things.
But I think that but my kids are learning my kids are learning Swift on their iPad, and they're typing away, and eventually Swift is going to be there. I mean, I think that, for instance, we're in an evolution. This is one step towards that computer. I mean, I think that when we look at like Final Cut. They made an announcement last week, I think it was last week, that basically Final Cut is not going, they said it's going to be, so they're going to support the Avid formats and some of the other formats for Mojave. Don't expect to be supported any further than Mojave, for your video formats. Yeah. Now, if I were building an iOS version if I was going to build an iOS version or an ARM version of a laptop or an iOS version of Final Cut, that's exactly what I would tell you in the future. So I think that there is we're looking at an evolution here of, this may not be there yet, but I'm even now, I now probably spend 50% of my time on my iPad. I mean, since I got the newer one, I kind of, and I admit that I'm experimenting with that process, but I'm finding myself much happier. If I'm in a meeting, I don't take my laptop anymore. I just take my laptop. If I'm having a meeting, I don't take my laptop. If there are things that I still need to do on it, stuff like OmniGraffle and other things like that, I'm still using, and obviously Final Cut and those types of things. But I'm finding myself more and more happy with that. And part of it's just forcing myself to do it. As soon as I force myself to, I'm just going to use my iPad for this because I know that it can do it. I immediately find that, oh, this is much nicer, and I can now draw in the middle of my notes, and I can, the note-taking apps are not perfect, but I think that they're getting much better.
The other thing, to me, is the biggest sign of all of this is that at the same event, Apple introduced an iPad Pro and a MacBook Air because they realize that there are different segments of the market, and both those products will be hugely attractive to different people. And the sort of part where I have a problem is if you say, if you can't do all your work on an iPad Pro, then you're just a dummy and you're not trying. Or if you say, like, there was this huge controversy, and I won't name any names, but it's all over Twitter for the last 4 days. Very popular tech media company, and some of their people basically said, if you use an iPad Pro, then you're not doing effing real work. And I think that's hugely insulting.
Wait a minute, name names. Who the hell said that?
No, it's on Twitter. I don't want to, but it's just not.
I'm looking on Twitter, and if
I don't do Twitter, I'm missing out, I guess.
Yeah, no, and I think that but their work may be different than yours. They might be a real estate agent, an architect. They might be the illustrator doing all this stuff for Star Trek. They might be there's so many people, DJs, musicians, who are doing amazing work, and just because it's not your work does not mean it is invalid.